And great morning to every one of you. Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is your host, Dr. Lakita Long, and we are excited to be coming to you to the I Speak Life Mental Health Tour in commemoration of the National Mental Health Awareness Month. And we are elated that we get a chance to come back to each and every last one of you to discuss the various aspects of mental health that we see locally as well as globally. And as you can see, I'm all dressed up in some kind of outfit here, trying to believe as if I'm on CNN of some sort. And because we're going to be talking about a topic that renders us a real conversation around the areas of mental health and the Black community. And I thought that it would be necessary for us to have a discussion around the origins of how African Americans, Black people even came to be a part of the mental health system, so that then it can kind of give us some understanding and some thought processes around why we think the way we do the things that we do, why things are enculturated in our culture, and even possibly why we have some of the sayings that we hear people like even Kanye West, where he says that slavery was a choice. And we'll get a chance to talk about it because of the research that was done for this particular topic. It is going to be a part 1 and part 2. So today we'll do part 1 to give you a background and an ideology of what mental health in the Black community looked like, started from going all the way back to the antebellum days in the 1700s up to the day. Ironically, mental health is not discussed and or talked about prior to, which I think is very interesting considering that slavery had already started and things of that nature. And so they didn't see some of the reactions of the Africans that they brought over to enslave as anything about mental health. As a matter of fact, they deemed that some of the rebelliousness and pushback was because they didn't know any better. It was more so on a different type of level and not necessarily because they were in a distressing situation. So we're going to have some fun on today. And so I just want to make sure that all the good people on our Facebook is doing well. It is going to be an absolute blessing today. You want to get your pens and papers though. I think that I hope, it is my hope, that the information that I'm going to be sharing today, it's going to sound very professorial and very astute and very teacher-like, collegiate-like. So if you've ever gone to college, or if you've never gone to college, well, you've entered into the world of Dr. Lakita, psychology, mental health, and Black communities 101. We are definitely going to go to that space and to that place on today. One of the things that I want you to understand prior to us going into this space and place is that we are looking to be the absolute best transfer of information that we can. So we were able to get the information that we needed in order to give you what you need to give you a base and a foundation. We will start with part 1 today with the backdrop, and then tomorrow we will go into the realities of what and how mental health has been conditioned for Black people 300, 400, 500 years ago, and why we possibly see what we see on today. So if you got questions and things of that nature, please let us know. This is my love, and I have forgotten how much I love the history of mental health, and particularly the depthness of the history concerning African Americans, Black folks, Black people. And for those that were back in the day, the Negroids. They even had a mental illness called the Negrotoids. We're going to talk about it. Some crazy stuff, y'all. Stuff that just makes your mind go, wow. And as you looked at the trajectory of every time they assigned some type of diagnosis for Black people that were enslaved, then they would reascribe it when Black people would ascend past what was allowed and what was foretold. And then they just would keep changing it. They would just keep changing the people. And so I'm wondering if you guys can still hear me. It looks like for whatever reason, here we go again, we are frozen. So I'm hoping that you guys can hear me. I'm not going to touch anything, but if you can let me know that you can hear me, that would be really, really perfect and great. You can hear me. Okay, perfect. Great shout outs to all of you. Thank you guys for giving me, okay, hearts and loves. I knew that this would be very powerful. Really tag some people, Black people, Black men, the things that they did to Black men and things of that nature in the 1700s, 1600s is really, 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 thank you so much in the Zoom room. Appreciate you. Is really daunting and damning. And I actually think I want to start off this particular conversation on today, because I get really radical when we start dealing with these types of areas. Because Lord, I just love doing this work. Let me be able to do it even more and more and more. I'm sorry, I just had to say that. I love giving information, because when you are informed, then you can make decisions. And when you are just making decisions, then you don't move in fear. And we don't move in fear, that you are more than a conqueror. And when you're more than a conqueror, you are feared by others because you have no fear. And if we could ever get to a place that God is for us and not against us, if we could ever get to a place that greater is he that's in us than he that's in the world, if we could ever get to the place that we can do all things through Christ, which strengthens us, if we could ever get to a place that he commanded us to have dominion over all things, he commanded us to have dominion even over the principalities of this of the earth. He gave us power through his son, Jesus Christ, that we will not be able to be harmed, according to Luke 19, I think, and 10. And so if we could ever get to a space where we can unlock the mindsets that have been engendered on us for years and years and eons and eons. And God gave me a revelation even as I was studying. I'm telling you, I'm going to wait till it kind of marinate the rest of the day today. And then I'm going to break off the revelation that he gave me on tomorrow, because some people that have been, glory to God, that have been free, that have been bound up for years, eons, centuries, hundreds, 200-300 years, the Lord showed me the clarity of what can really help Black people just break out. There's a break. There is a breakout that Black people, I'm sorry, I'm not being racist or prejudicial or anything. I'm just speaking truth to power concerning African Americans. And there's a breakout that's needed amongst African Americans, Black people, those who know that they Black, know that they experience the injustices of Black folks or whatnot. There's a breakout getting ready to occur. Just as I stated that the Lord gave me that there is a mental health global crisis occurring even as we speak. And there's not much that the mental health world is doing, because they do not have the spiritual insight to be able to navigate what absolutely needs to happen. And while I don't believe I'm the only voice, I do believe that God has called me to be a voice. And I would love to be used as Joseph was in the time that he was, and do feel the prepping. Glory to God. I don't know how God's going to do it, but I believe God is getting ready to do it, because there is getting ready to be a breaking out of African Americans. You watch what I say. God is going to break out in the minds of African Americans, and even in those who are not African American. But I'm specifically wanting to speak life to those who are of the Black descent on today, that you be encouraged, but you need to break out of every diabolical, every generational habit, every generational curse, everything that has held you. Woo, glory to God, that has held you back, that has caused you to be hampered in your ability and in your mindset. And it happens because you took on a thought, you took on a formulation of a thought, you took on a habit, you took on a spirit that you didn't even realize, you took on a way of being, my God. But the power of what God has shared with me, I believe, if you can believe it, God can break you out of it. I'm talking about stuff that would allow you to make decisions better concerning your finances, concerning your health. But you have got to be able to hear in your inner ear what God is trying to say to you. Some of you just have to just make a literal about face. You just have to make a turn. You just have to decide, I do not want that in my space. I do not want that conversation in my speech. I do not want that kind of mindset in my thinking. And I am telling you, God's going to do it. And so I hope that you are listening with an attentive ear to hear whatever God is going to share with us on today. I'm sure it's going to be powerful. And then we're going to discuss the realities of it all on tomorrow. Here, let me preface this as well. whatever I'm doing or whatever I'm saying, I've kind of figured out after being in ministry since I've been 15 years of age. So this is my 32nd year of being in ministry, like full-fledged, like in a real serious way. My boss, my first boss, who I still keep in touch with, the famous Jerry Craig, glory to God. And he was already a Christian when I came into contact with him. I was hired as the youngest employee of the state of California. I was 15 and a half years old, and I worked at the EDD office in Long Beach, and I was a youth employment specialist. And God gave me that job because he wanted me to know two things: that what he called me to do, it was absolutely going to work, number one. So he gave me a good year and a half practice. I had that job all the way till I graduated from high school. A year and a half practice of watching biblical principles be in and psychological concepts work in real time. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of low-income African-American kids, as well as Latino kids and some adults, came to re-engage their lives through the workforce development process. And we were designed to and have programs that got them jobs. Particularly, the one thing that Jerry Craig said to me is that, first of all, he realized, wait a minute, during the interview, you're only 15 years old. Wait a minute, you can't be going for this job. And I said, sir, I'm gonna need for you to look on the top of your job description, and it says under the qualifications. He said, no, I need somebody that's in college. I said, look on the qualifications, sir. I was a bold somebody, I'm telling you, 15 years of age, Lord have mercy. I said, your qualification said you prefer that they be in college. Preferred means maybe, could be, maybe not so much. And so the preferred for me is that I'm not so much. I'm in high school, honor student in a program that allows me to leave at 12 because I'm in all AP classes, including AP calculus. So let's not get on the technical. He just looked at me and I said, and the next question you have for me, sir, is until that day, the Lord saw fit to allow me to be hired for a job that really wasn't even supposed to be. I just was bold enough to believe that God would saturate me with his anointing to just go forward. And I learned that in the midst of it all, I saw the depravity of Black people struggling economically. And I marvel at how God positioned me even in my family. There was a family of 7. We weren't always poor, but when tragedy hits, and that's another long story. Maybe I'll use my family's story tomorrow to caveat mental health in the Black community and how my brother had a nervous breakdown and became a paranoid schizophrenic. Maybe that's what I'll do. But the whole thrust of looking at Black people needing jobs, but when they come sit down at the desk, and young people, young adults, they can't really function in the interview and they don't have the wherewithal. So guess what? The Lord said, today you create workshops and trainings. Lord have mercy. So God was fine-tuning all of my skill sets. And I would always have to get approval because it was always out of the norm. Particularly speaking, they wanted on the contract, we had to hire 300 disadvantaged youth between the ages, I believe it was 14 and 25 or something like that. And that a certain percentage of them need to come from either a gang related or kind of have some gang affiliation. It was a kind of interesting thing. And I went to my boss and I said, Jerry, I said, Mr. Craig, listen, if you want us to hit these numbers, we're going to have to go out and hire a gangster. Call me crazy, okay? 15 and a half years old. He said, we can't, you know, and poor Jerry Craig, this white man, Christian, living his faith in private. Did you hear what I said? Living his Christian faith in private. To this day, he'll tell you that he's always shared this with me, that the Lord used me to live his Christian life out loud and in public because I was a marketplace minister and I knew that from the time I was 15. So needless to say, we hired a gangster. And I'm still friends with him today. And it is crazy. And we met all of our numbers. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the very thing that they have ascribed to African Americans is the thing that not only hampered or hindered their progress, but a generational level of hinder and the progress being hindered. And so I want you to take a note of what I'm getting ready to speak on today as we talk about mental health and the Black community. Is so deep. It's so deep that there's a part one and a part two, because we've got to get in this information for you to understand that you not wanting to get therapy has been an issue for years prior to now. It's been in the workings for 400 years. Okay. So let's get to the business that we need to get to. All right. Y'all ready? The U.S. Surgeon General stated, members of ethnic and racial minority groups in the U.S. face a social and economic environment of inequality that includes a greater exposure to racism, discrimination, violence, and poverty, all of when the opportunities show up takes a toll on one's mental health. And I want you to note about the exposure of racism, discrimination, violence, and poverty. Those four elements are strongly laced in the Black communities, strongly laced. Don't get it twisted because of what you see amongst the elitists of the Black. If you drive in any city, Stockton, Oakland, Richmond, you are going to immensely feel racism, discrimination, violence, and poverty amongst African Americans. Now, today I'm only talking about Blacks because I want us to have a different understanding about Black people. So please engender your thought processes around the institutional and the institutionalized efforts of many to constantly thwart the way in which African Americans think and or be. So here we go. Dr. Uchenna Ume, a San Antonio, Texas physician, she did some research and described how mental health corrupts and interrupts African Americans and have done it for hundreds and hundreds of years. She realized and viewed that American medical community from the antebellum period until today showed gross misdiagnosing as well as misinterpretation of people's attitudes and behaviors based upon their enslavement. This period started in the 1700s. In the process, Blacks were looked upon as dumb and so many other things, but most importantly, I want you to understand the gravity of how it affected their mental health. In 1848, Dr. John Galt, a physician and medical director of the Eastern Lunatic Asylum in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I want you to understand a lot of mental health stuff came out of Williamsburg, Virginia, just a note. He offered, this was what he believed, Dr. John Galt, G-A-L-T, for those who like to research, that Blacks are immune to mental health and mental illness. Let me say it again. He believed Blacks are immune to mental illness. He further hypothesized that enslaved Africans could not develop mental illness because as enslaved people, they did not own property, engage in commerce, or participate in civic affairs, such as voting, or they did not hold an office. Do you understand what he said? That because we were not involved in the radicalness and the plainness of life, that we were immune to being mentally ill. I want you to come follow me. By the time I'm done, you're gonna have some other kind of thoughts. This immunity hypothesis assumed that at the time that the risk of lunacy of African Americans, it would be highest in those populations who are emotionally exposed to the stress. Now, this is what they said. He believed that those who were exposed to the stress of profit making, it's only those individuals who could have mental health issues. I want you to see how crazy it is. So principally, only white people can have some level of mental health. Okay. And be stressed because they were involved in some profit-making type of venture. And because African were slaves, how could they be mentally ill? Unfortunately, African-American ancestry have subconsciously embraced and propagated the narrative, much to the detriment, believing that it was a problem did not even exist in their own race. So many Blacks took on what Dr. Galt said. We don't have mental health issues because that ain't none of my business. I ain't Mr. Joseph. Mr. Joseph, he got so, I want you to get it. Mr. Joseph got so many things going on. He got to take care of, he taking care of all of us. He taking care of his family. So yeah, every now and then he wants to climb on my daughter. Every now and then he just wants to release because he like going crazy. And the least I can do is offer up my daughter, and the devil is a liar. And yet that is the sickness. In 2018, I'm going to be going back and forth from the various years. Dr. Ume, Nigerian physician, she was so concerned about the things that was going on with the lack of understanding for African Americans and mental health. She quit her physician job in order to focus in on increasing awareness about mental illness amongst people of African ancestry in the US. She figured out, and she did the research along with several other African-American researchers, that suicide rates in African-American children between the ages of 5 to 11 have increased considerably since the 1980s. And it has doubled that of our Caucasian counterparts. Whereas Caucasians were notably known to be those of suicide attempt and suicide success, Black men in particular now make up 80%. Did you hear what I said? Black men make up 80% of attempted suicide in 2015 in the US. Black males now are 3 times more likely than women to commit suicide. And many of the various aspects of mental health for African Americans was not even noted beyond the 1700s or before. But a Dr. Benjamin Rush, he was a leading medical authority during the American Revolution. He actually disagreed with Dr. John Galt's ideas about the absence of mental illness amongst Black slaves. So Dr. John Galt did not believe that African-American slaves even had any mental health issues, mental illness. It was not known among them. They had an immunity to it because they weren't involved in profit making. Do you understand what I'm saying? When he wrote this, he said many of the enslaved Blacks suffered from what he considered to be, quote, abnormal behaviors, including, you ready for this? Negritude. Did you hear what I said? The man, and people believed what he said, that it's abnormal behaviors, including what he calls negroitude. He described negroitude as the irrational desire, watch this, by Blacks to become white. So Blacks wanting to have their own home, Blacks wanting to be in their own space, Blacks wanting to have their own money. He called that negritude, and he assimilated that to a mental health issue versus them having been slaves, not wanting to be slaves anymore, desiring the life of them that were free. Ain't the devil crazy? And listen, Jesus, he said he described it as the irrational desire by Blacks to become white. And since becoming white could only be accomplished by misogyny or miscegenation, I always say that word wrong, and he argued against interracial marriage between races to ensure that negritude, okay, I want you to understand, would not spread beyond Black populations. So in other words, they did not want the notion to spread amongst other Blacks that you can indeed have what they had. So they engendered all of these mindsets amongst Black people and put it in their hearing and amongst the slave owners and amongst the slaves themselves, and they turned initially on their own selves. He then further noted that Africans became insane after they were brought to slavery in the West Indies. So he saw that for some Blacks, the moment that they hit the plantation, they hit the place that they were going, they just went crazy in his mind. But he said that the craziness came about because they didn't want to be enslaved. It wasn't about it being enslaved. He said the crazy came about because they were trying so hard to become white. You see the backward thinkings of the people? And these were people that signed off medical treatments. These are people, there's so much. We only got about a minute or so, so I'm going to say this and then we'll continue. Other antebellum physicians promoted conditions such as, now this is really interesting, is drapetomania. Drapetomania is a disease that caused enslaved Blacks to be free on their plantations. They wanted to be free. Okay, drapetomania. And he said that that was a disease. The fact that Blacks wanted to be free was a treatment, a disorder. Just crazy. Or the dysphagia atopica was a disease purportedly caused by a state of dullness or lethargy, which they now considered that particular disease to be like a form of depression. So it was either the two. Drapetomania was when Blacks wanted to be freed and wanted to run and get off and out of slavery. They called that a condition. Or the opposite, where they just had no energy anymore because mentally they probably were just out of it. They call that a disorder. While many say these are responses to slavery, white physicians assumed they were actual manifestations of mental illness. So my wanting to be free and angry that I'm not, you label it as mental illness? Can you see the problems that we have going on? I'm going to take a few more minutes so I can get through this last page so it can all make sense. Dr. Samuel Cartwright, a pro-slavery physician, he worked with enslaved people in Louisiana, and he argued that severe, watch this, severe whipping was the typical best treatment for both of those disorders that I described, the drapetomania and the dysphagia atopia. They were accompanied, both of those things. Now watch this. When the Blacks would be sent to the physicians, they would see lesions on the Black people's bodies. And they thought the Black people had lesions out of nowhere. They were actually, historians now have figured out, they were the scars from the severe whooping that they said was to be the treatment for this mental illness that Black enslaved people had. So they took the Black enslaved people's scars as another level of some type of mental illness or lunacy. Do you see? What the physicians failed to recognize was the connection between the emotional states of the enslaved and the treatments that was recommended for the condition. And yet today, there's still a disconnect for African Americans on multiple levels. The judicial system, how we raise the children, so many things, and to where now the Black family, not all in its entirety, but a lot of Black families are so broken. Most pre-Civil War mental health facilities, and this is scary, and I've got to say this part, in the South, usually barred or restricted enslaved Blacks from treatment. Mental health experts at the time believed housing Blacks and whites in the same facilities would defile and defer and affect the healing of the white people. Blacks were often housed outdoors near the institution, or they were put in jail. Okay, so we see back in the 1800s, that the jails were always a space for African-American people with mental health issues, always. Oh, it's so deep, y'all. To the point where child slaves were cared for in the yard of these asylums. They didn't even have a place where they could be. So they were made to run around in this asylum area outside as children, being raised around all of this kind of chaotic environment. And they had no government funding, no oversight, and inmates, watch this, which was what the children were called. Inmates. I want you to hear the historicity of the word inmates. Today, everybody that goes to jail is called an inmate, but enslaved Black children at the same asylums, they were called inmates because they weren't supposed to really be there. They just happened to be an inmate. They're inside of the asylum and they are mate to somebody. And they call the children inmates. And they're still calling people inmates. But that's why you got the rehabilitation portion of the judicial jail system, because they're supposed to get rehabilitated. But the rehabilitation ain't happening. Black enslaved children regularly got misdiagnosed and wrongly was accused, watch this, of crimes extending their stay in the institutions and exposing them to additional mistreatment, maladaptive behavioral and skill sets that would then later become either a gross injustice to their entire life or would cause a whole generation to die off. Children were subject to hard labor, Black children nearby farms and near the institution. Foreshadowing, here we go, notorious convict leasing systems. It's so powerful how mental health brought in all of this. Convict leasing systems sprang up all over the South during the Reconstruction era, which meant that those who were enslaved and those who were incarcerated or inmates or those who committed crimes, they had a place to stay. And whether they stay, in order to pay for their place to stay, they worked, therefore starting the convict leasing system. Often the labor of the Black children was so awesome, now watch this though, and praised by the asylum authorities or the physicians of the institutions. There, it further questioned and raised questions about the connection of the disorder and the mental health illness. Herein is what lies the glimpse of where we possibly can see for Blacks, contemporarily speaking, had the great distrust of healthcare systems from that particular time period. How is it that I am mentally defect, but you are praising me for the great work that I'm doing? And this is what they said. They said that when they saw these things happening, Black slaves were truly out of their senses. So they're out of their senses because they were able to sustain hard labor, learn regular special skills, while they figured out that their white counterparts was too feeble-minded to even work. They forget that they brought Black people over from Africa where they had so much going on for their whole life, tribes and buildings and all of that. And you brought them over and you whipped them and you did all kinds of things to demean them. And they were trying to get their bearing. So then when they started doing well, you said that they had some level of mental health issues. So the mental health issues spanned 322 years, long before it went. And I'm going to take this last 30 seconds. So then Black people lost years of accurate records of who they were mentally, psychologically speaking. The misappropriation of diagnosis and the information that was given for most of the time was absolutely incorrect. Furthermore, things were constantly changing and being different, pinpointing for something that was never to be. I used to say growing up, even when I was 12 years of age, because I watched my brother as a paranoid schizophrenic, I used to say someone made them go crazy. And that was also the postulation or the hypothesis amongst many people and even amongst Blacks, which is why they would never talk about mental health issues. Ooh, somebody made him go, he is out there. And they had this taboo around mental health issues because the taboo started even when we were not even in mental illness at the time. Just doing well under harsh circumstances, we were considered to have some mental health issues. On the other end, though, those of Jewish descent or whatever, if they endured hard labor, there is no mental health thing attached to them. As a matter of fact, their push and ability to be able to do excellent work, they were called geniuses. And then they would see, okay, let's grab some of these Jews because they can probably be of great help to us, engineers, scientists. But so for us, we got a lunacy because we can endure hard labor. For everybody else, they're genius. And I'm going to stop there today. But mental health in the Black community goes very, very deep. And we've got to look at the messaging that we've been given. And I want to thank you for allowing me to take the few extra moments that we normally don't take. But the topic is so powerful. And there's an origin to everything. And if you don't understand the origin, you will be lost in the mud concerning all the other stuff. Black people aren't just deciding that they don't want to live in their homes. They're not just deciding to act crazy. Some Black women today, they get into a mental state because they don't want to be raped again. There's so many layers to Black communities in mental health. And I'm hoping that over the next couple of days, I will shed some light of where we've been. This is like a whole PBS commentary docu-series that really should be looked upon and looked at. So we're going there. And to be encouraged that everything you got going on in your life, African Americans, Black folks, there is an opportunity for reversal. You can have a do-over, especially those who believe in the awesome radical power of God. He's been the greatest resource for Black people. And if we could ever really not get caught up into all this other stuff that I'm seeing going on, the power of God is so profound. People say, oh, it's some white man's religion. Well, I don't know nothing about that. And yet I've read, because my minor from UC Berkeley is in religion. And so greatly astute. I had to read so many books. Oh my God, the Maccabees and so many books and so many things that I learned. But one thing is true, for me at least, is that the power of God can never be refuted. And if God can take a group of people who were enslaved, designed to be left and unheard of again, and cause them to raise up and be known in an earth and in a time where they still don't want them to, but that's a great God. So today, encourage your own soul, encourage your own self, and know that all things really do work together for the good of those who love God, who are the called according to his purpose. Be blessed, be encouraged, and love you guys so much. I'm Dr. Lakita, and you're looking at I Speak Life Mental Health Tour, mental health in the Black community. God bless and have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.